Hello and welcome everybody. It's Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. On today's episode, we're going to be breaking down the top 16/17, which I'll explain in a minute, about the cEDH Top Deck GG Expo. This was held at CCS, Charlie's Collectible Show, in Stone Mountain, Georgia. So this was a tournament kind of with not many things like around it as far as like location wise, but it was a really cool space. Basically in a collectibles flea market, we had this giant 200-person cEDH tournament. So not only was it a 200-person tournament, but literally some of the best cEDH players from all across the United States were at this tournament. It was a very difficult competition. Literally some of the most known names in cEDH were here competing at this tournament. $8,000 in prizing led to a crazy, crazy tournament. I myself bubbled out due to some crazy plays from other players in this tournament, and I made a pretty good run. I was pretty proud of where I was, but didn't make the top 16 myself. But without any further ado, let's start talking about this tournament. But before that,
editor's note. Without any further ado means without waiting any longer or right away. Yes, audience. I am here. I am now editing Ian's videos. He thought rather foolishly that he was only in danger of my ridicule while on Scrybabies or the Mind Sculptors. But no, I am omnipresent. I am all-seeing. I am a god, made shepherd, tasked with tending to the content production of my sheep. And besides, it is about time this channel lived up to its name and had more funny moments, don't you think? Anyhow, Ian, tell us about today's sponsor.
Into the AM. So Into the AM is a pretty modern clothing brand, mainly focusing on graphic tees, which you can see I have one of on me today. And I'm super excited to be able to get this sponsor because it's a pretty sick brand. I went through and checked through their website and got a bunch of different items from the shop. And I just figured I'd show you some of the items here today. You can even see that not only do they have these awesome graphic tees, which seems to be their specialty, but they also have sick clothing items like this. I have these shorts from Into the AM, and I literally love these things so much. These are like the craziest tie-dye shorts, and actually some of the greens getting picked up by the green screen behind me. But I'm gonna be wearing a bunch of Into the AM products throughout the course of this video, including some sleeveless tees, which if you watch this channel, you know I love me some sleeveless tees.
Into the AM also has their Black Friday sale going on right now until November 30th. There are discounts from 30% up to 80% off site-wide that are added on top of your 10% discount when you use the link in the description.
If you are interested in checking out Into the AM and receiving 10% off of your order, you can check the link that will be pinned in the comments down below as well as in the description of this video, and you can get 10% off your order from Into the AM.
Now, without any further ado, see, that is the proper use of the term. Let's get into today's video.
So we have our 17th place participant here because his story was absolutely fantastic and ended in such heartbreak. So for those who don't know, Just Ice is a pretty strong player in general who has been doing really well in the online tournament scene. So Just Ice has, I believe, won a tournament and had a couple top cuts in a few others, but hasn't gotten the top 16 or top 4 in any in-person tournaments. And this one is heartbreaking because basically, you had to get 17 points, as in 3 wins and 2 draws, to qualify for the top 16. Anyone with a worse score than that didn't qualify. Just Ice ended the first day, basically at round 4, they had 0 wins, 2 losses, and 2 draws, and they had to win the rest of their rounds to be able to qualify for the top 16. And they did. They won every single round after round 4. They won round 5, woke up the next day, won round 6, and won round 7 to get that 17 points. But there were just enough 17-point participants that Just Ice was eliminated from the top 16 by 0.02% match percentage losses. And they actually lost out to a player who got a bye in the first round. So after literally making such an incredible comeback, it wouldn't have been fair for me to do this top 16 breakdown without shouting out this performance by Just Ice, because he absolutely just went from rode that loser's bracket all the way up and literally had enough points to qualify, but happened to be the one person with a 17-point record that did not make it. So huge shout out to Just Ice for putting in a good performance. And let's check out their list here. It's a pretty classic Blue Farm list. The list, I think we talked about it a little bit leading up to this tournament. When someone is talking to me about Blue Farm, I'm going to tell them to be on that Teferi tech. I love it. I think it's uncuttable in blue farm. I think it's so strong in this archetype, and I think it just leads to free wins all the time. We have a few more humans than the average blue farm list running Lavinia. I've never been a huge fan of Lavinia in the archetype, but it seems like a lot of blue farm players are using it to be basically force of will protection during their turn. We got Flesh Duplicate here, being a good copy, a good clone, replacing Phantasmal Image in a lot of these lists. Dauntless Dismantler here, just absolutely ruining people's day, out-tempoing him, and creating a lot of scenarios where their permanents are coming in tapped and they're not able to be as fast, as explosive as they want to be. This card is awesome. It's a blind obedience on a body that triggers Tymna. It's one of the best blockers in the format. And then worst case scenario, your opponent's like playing multiple Docksides. You're like, fine, I'll sack my Dismantler for 0, wipe all the treasures off the board, wipe those Mana Crypts, wipe those Jewel Lotuses, get them all out of here. Dismantler is really powerful, really strong. And I think we're going to be seeing this card for a long time. To be clear also, Ixalan had just become legal the day of this tournament. So, or I guess technically the night before at pre-release. But the way Commander tournaments work is pre-release equals legality. So as soon as pre-releases happen, new cards illegal. So we down to the sorceries here. We see one board wipe, Toxic Deluge. Now I know the board wipes in Blue Farm are often like one of the most heavily debated topics in this list. How many of these board wipes do you run in your deck? And Just Ice deciding here, Deluge is just fine. Got 16 artifacts here, which I always appreciate in a blue farm list. This one also running the One Ring and Talion. So definitely the more heavy on the card advantage engines than some of the other blue farm lists that are out there right now. We got 28 lands here, a lot of the other stuff. So Blind Obedience and Dauntless Dismantler being here in this blue farm list. Some lists aren't even playing Blind Obedience, aren't even playing Dismantler. So they're, not really having as many stacks pieces. We also see Curse Totem here in this blue farm list. So definitely a much more mid-rangey, tempo-y, stacksy version of this deck. That's slowing down a little bit, but to really have pieces in here that are silver bullets that can disrupt certain archetypes. If you're worried about Kinnan, a lot of the cards that I just mentioned are really going to start hosing that deck, right? If you're worried about Rograkh, not the Curse Totem, but those come into play artifact tap things are really, really solid, especially Sisay too. Gets really, really badly hurt by a lot of the pieces we just mentioned here. So sorry, Just Ice, to see that you missed that top cut, but you deserve the recognition for this performance. You made the hustle, you did great, and you had a record that deserved it in a very large, very heavy competitive tournament. So congrats on performing and congrats on a comeback of a century. We have cEDH by Caveman. This is another blue farm list here. We are noticing, no Teferi in this version of the list. Big differences here. Gilded Drake, which is not always in a lot of blue farm lists, but if we're moving more towards these mid-range blue farm variants, it starts to make sense. We have Phyrexian Metamorph and Phantasmal Image here over the Flesh Duplicate that we just spoke of with the last list. Definitely more sorceries in this list. We have Damn over Toxic Deluge. We have Wheel of Fortune. We have Sabines. Which, now that I think about it, I didn't really see that in the other version of this list. We have another One Ring combination here with Talion, but once again, no Dauntless Dismantler, but we are seeing Blind Obedience, which until this tournament, it was not a piece I would often say is seen in these blue farm lists. So very interesting here. 15 artifacts in the deck, but apart from that, pretty standard blue farm variant. Congrats to our Caveman for getting in there. We have Tropical Rum by Helenium, but this was not by Helenium. This is by a player called Wyatt. This is the Thrasios Akiri Evolution deck. So this variant of Sands Black is meant to basically just be a turbo Underworld Breach deck. Now, I did actually play Wyatt during the Swiss of this tournament, and they played extremely well. They played very tight, and they presented wins over and over again. They were able to sort of grind with the table until they were able to leverage multiple attempts at resolving an Underworld Breach and being able to go off like that. This deck is definitely pretty low to the ground. You have your Thrasios to really keep things low and keep things honest, but also provide you that bit of grind. You have outlets for your infinite mana. You can go with Emil Dockside combos. You can use Auriok Salvagers combined with Lion's Eye Diamond. And you can go through combos like that, or you can just go the old-fashioned turbo breach plan and really just get a breach down the battlefield and start trying to win the game ASAP. Definitely a 25 land deck, really low to the ground, but Thrasios kind of allows you to keep low to the ground, not as low to the ground as Dockside, but in trade, you get a bunch of really powerful white cards with this strategy. You get things like the Ephemerate lines with Spellseeker, for those who don't know, because this really hasn't come up in a decent amount of time. You get Spellseeker, you ephemerate, and you basically go through a line where you can get a Lightning Tutor, put Underworld Breach on top of your deck, which allows you to go flicker the Spellseeker again, get your Brain Freeze, and go over and redo your combo, and you're able to put the Lion's Eye Diamond on top of your deck by casting the Lightning Tutor again after you've done your whole thing. It's basically turns Spellseeker into an Anala for Underworld Breach. So it's pretty sick in this archetype specifically. I think you need to be in Jeskai colors to make that loop happen. But it's pretty powerful and very clean way to get your breach plan going. So congrats to Wyatt here for being able to put up top result with this list. Also, Boo, card to be looking out for. This card has been performing over and over again in these lists, and it's just every other turn is a removal spell and draw for, which is far from bad, I would argue. We got Grinding Station here by Connor. This is Rograkh, the fast 24 land Rograkh that we know and maybe love. This list definitely got a little bit of a boost with Lord of the Rings, adding cards like Orcish Bowmasters, but specifically adding cards like Born Upon the Wind, making those Necropotence lines that are very feared in Rograkh just even more powerful and more consistent. I've seen so many Rogsais now just be able to do crazy stuff where they're in response to a Pact of Negation trigger that they can't have enough mana to pay for. They'll use Born Upon the Wind to be able to win on top of that. Just being able to draw 20, 30 cards at the end step with Necropotence, do crazy stuff like that. So Rograkh keeps getting more and more tools, and the deck is extremely strong. So definitely a list to continue looking out for, a list you gotta respect. I know I was in a couple pods with Rograkh during this tournament, and in those pods, our opponents did not let them have an inch. And in those pods, those Rograkh decks didn't win. But anytime you let Rograkh have just even a sliver of an inch of respect, the deck will go away and run away with the game. And honestly, with getting more and more tools like Beseech the Mirror lately and other cards like the One Ring, although this list doesn't seem to be on that. I know some lists are on it, some lists are not. But Conqueror's Flail is another one. They're just adding another defense grid into the deck. The deck is becoming powerful and consistent and very, very terrifying for that reason. So congrats to Connor here for this top 16. We have Freedom Waffle here with Good Soup. This is Freedom's blue farm list that they've been doing pretty well with since they picked it up. The classic Freedom tech of Boromir here seems to be a card that he favors quite a lot. We have Metamorph and Fimage here over Flesh Duplicate, which I'm kind of interested in. Definitely curious to hear thoughts on that. I assume it's a matter of casting cost with this list specifically. This list on Intent and Namada Betrayal, which is definitely a bit more than some of the other lists that we've seen on this archetype. But yeah, Freedom Waffle has been a pretty consistent and good player, and they've picked up one of the best decks in the format, and it's been paying off pretty well. I'm going to change my outfit for Into the AM. Oh. Found this design on their website, and I actually really love this. Also, these shirts are comfy as heck. Big fan of these, and thank you again for sponsoring this video. Into the AM, you guys are sick. Once again, that link is in the description and the comments below. But anyways, we are here with I Blame Max with When in Doubt, Jund 'em Out, Soggy Edition. This is Max's list that he's been doing really well with, but most people might know Max as one of the head judges from Eminence and also one of the people who owns the company. He or at least runs the company and as a head. Max is also just happens to be a pretty good player and has been playing this Soggy Jund list. This is Thrasios and Vial Smasher, which I'm starting to notice has been really underrated as of late, and players who've been picking up this archetype are doing quite well with it. The idea is that you have this sort of Sans White Turbo Nas list plus just a bunch of combos, right? I mean, specifically you get the Temur Dockside loops. Some lists are running Basalt Monolith, but it looks like this one is, this one is also as well. So you get Kinnan plus Basalt Monolith, then you also get Underworld Breach Lines, obviously super powerful. You get Necropotence plus cards we were just talking about with Born Upon the Wind and Final Fortune, right? Those Necropotence lines are the strongest they've ever been. So being able to leverage advantage with those is pretty sweet. And we got Culling Ritual in this deck, which is really proving to be one of the strongest wipes in the format, being able to take out rocks and especially hurt decks like Kinnan in the format, which if that deck's pain in the butt for you, this is one of the cards to take it out. So this list is really interesting because it takes some of the best parts of green, which is mostly the ability to tutor and combo with Dockside and cards like Culling Ritual, and then adds all of the classic powerful Grixis stuff that exists in the format. Gives you Thrasios for those games where you get kind of stacked out. You can use stuff like Mayhem Devil to pick apart your opponent's board. And then, of course, you have your Thoracle, Consult, Pact lines to really be able to just create this giant pile of good stuff soup that you see in this deck. We have Dardo the Do by Hebrew Hercules. This is Hebrew Hercules coming back here with this Mardu Dargo list. What this list is really interesting with is that it is a Tymna and Dargo list, with Dargo being the explosive side of this deck and Tymna here really being the advantage leverer. So you have Nixilis here to be able to combo off with Dargo. You have all of the sacrifice effects. You have things like Ruthless Technomancer, you have Burning Inquiry. Some lists are also playing Sacrifice, which this one is, and you can leverage those into cards like Peer into the Abyss for sure. A lot of lists are also playing Bolsa Citadel and Adnaz, and this one is doing that. You are just really trying to absolutely slam that foot on the gas pedal But if things go wrong and your opening hand is betraying you, you absolutely have the ability to just pivot to a Tymna game plan. You still have amazing cards like Abolisher and Esper Sentinel, Ragvan, Dockside, like all of these great creatures that can really just start to combo off with your list. I'm also seeing Magda in this list. I'm wondering if doesn't seem like there's any Cloudstone lines in the deck, so I'm just wondering if Magda plus Dockside is just supposed to go grab you a Bolsa Citadel. We have Altar of Dementia here, which is a great Dargo combo and allows you to go Infinite Mill with Bergie, which is pretty sick, and also just a pretty clean line for this list. Then you have some of the grindier pieces like Mayhem Devil, Oppo, and Pro Facebreaker to really start turning that Tymna plan into a winning thing. Seize the Spotlight is a one that I haven't seen before. So each player chooses Fame, gain control of creature that player controls until the end turn, untap those creatures, they gain haste, and for each player who chose Fortune, you draw a card and create treasure. So when you take people's stuff, you can use it to sack Dargo, which is pretty sick. And then people who don't want to lose their creatures are going to let you draw a card and make a treasure, which also helps with Dargo. So this is actually a pretty sweet card, and I definitely have not seen that before. I really like that as a piece of Dargo tech. Just having that Dargo sack outlet in the command zone is pretty funny. We have Necropotence lines here in this list too, but obviously a little bit worse than other ones. I've always wondered why this variant of Dargo does not run the Arena Rector, because it'd be pretty easy to just play Arena Rector, sack Dargo, have an uncounterable Underworld Breach, or, Smothering Tithe if you really want to go for that angle, or Necropotence. So it seems like it'd be kind of a pretty sick thing here, but it's amazing to see this 7 mana commander in the command zone, but a 24 land deck. Obviously Dargo reduces the cost for itself, but pretty sweet. And Hebrew Hercules has been doing really, really well with this deck, and now in person as well. Lost in Translation by Nevi and Serg. 1337. This is Surge with this Rogsai list. Not much different than the one we featured earlier this episode, and may exactly be the same list. So not much to say about this. 2 Rogsai lists in this top 16. Both did very well. It was once again a hard tournament to break through. So Rogsai being able to push through a lot of those decks getting to the top 16 and being a consistent, powerful, explosive deck. Matthew Brady 20 here with Najeela. This is Najeela. It is the Najeela list that we've been seeing on and off for the better part of a year now. Nothing too crazy as far as recent additions to the deck. It's looking pretty similar to the stuff that most people have been playing throughout the year. There's been talk about Bowmasters being bad for Najeela and taking it out of these top 16s, but it's definitely not performing as well as it was at one point. But I think competent pilots are still able to take this deck and perform well with it. You're doing the Adnos stuff, you're doing intuition lines with Underworld Breach, stuff like that. And you're just able to leverage a bunch of different combos, including combos with your commander, to be able to take advantage and go for this win. Blueberry Pie by Max P MTG. We have Max P, the known Florian pilot, here with this Talion list. This list is sick. I actually got to play it after hours on Sunday after the tournament, and it was really, really fun to pilot. But this is the blue-black, fully grind control list. That's what we're doing here today. We got Karn, the Great Creator, here to shut down artifacts. We got a few more stacks pieces here with things like Grafdigger's Cage and Weathered Runestone and Curse Totem. So definitely some stacks pieces in this list, but the idea behind Talion is really just you have a blue-black Rhystic Study in the command zone and you want to grind the game down. Now, one interesting thing when I was talking to Max about this deck is the idea was for him to use pieces of interaction that were rather atypical. So you see things here like Subtlety, and if you look over here, the instance, we have some ones that aren't quite found as much. Things like Liliana's Triumph, Shieldred's Edict, a bunch of sacrifice effects, things like Trick Bind, which is not the most common counterspell, Wind's Rebuke to mill top and bounce stuff. So definitely some of the pieces here for removal or interaction that are not always the most commonly used. But this list is really meant to be able to just play the blue-black control game plan. You are really trying to grind the game down, slow it down, use the fact that Talion is going to get you a ridiculous amount of card advantage. The main wins in the deck are really grinding things out with things like Shieldred, Oakish Bowmasters in the same light, really grinding with those cards. Obviously, you have your Thoracle Consult or Thoracle Tainted Pack lines, and I was told by Max that Hullbreaker Horror is actually one of the main win cons in the deck, and I was talking to them about like how is it a win con without a real outlet in the deck. But the idea is by the time you get to leverage Hullbreaker Horror, either A, one of your clones can copy someone else's outlet, say there's a Thrasios on the field or a Kinnan or something like that, which is not the most uncommon way to play through that. But also there are things like just if you have your Orcish Bowmasters, you're able to use that to ping everybody to death. Or if you have the One Ring on the battlefield, you're able to draw a card and then bounce it back to your hand, and then draw a card and then bounce it back to your hand, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely a lot of different ways for you to be able to combo off with that card for that reason. Black Market Connections I was talking about Max with was basically one of the first cards he was thinking about cutting from this deck. Apart from that, this is a lot of blue-black mid-range value. You are trying to grind the game out. You're trying to use the fact that, once again, you have that card advantage engine ready for you to use at all times. And also don't forget the fact that you are doing 2 damage to your opponent every time they cast a spell. I think for the most part, you named the number 2, I believe, according to Max. But you are dealing a lot of damage, and it starts to really chip away at your opponent's life totals. Fun fact, I was also talking to Max, and he said, a lot of people, I think, worry about Talion being cloned, right? With things like Fimage from your opponents and stuff like that. But you actually kind of don't mind that, because then it starts to add up to the damage game plan that you're already sort of going for. One of the other main win conditions, and I'm pretty sure Max was responsible for starting to first promote this win con in this deck, is Bloodchief Ascension, because every time your opponents trigger Talion's ability, they will be pinged by Bloodchief Ascension, and it gets online insanely quick. And because of that, it's a real clock. Then by the time people are casting their spells, they're putting things in the graveyard just by resolving instants and sorceries, the life totals start to go down really quick, and your life total starts to get aggressively padded. So Blood Chiefs is really, really crazy in this deck as well. Counterbalance is also really good in a deck where you're able to instant speed stack the top of your library, because you are able to do things like, okay, resolve my Talion trigger first, then resolve Counterbalance, or vice versa, and be able to control what looks like the top of your deck. But congrats to Max on this top performance with the deck. I believe he only had like 1 loss going into day 2, which was pretty insane, and proceeded to do very, very well with this list. Unfortunately, not making it to the top 4, but once again, some absolutely great players here in this top 16. So very understandable that even the best performing players in the day still didn't make it. Wounded Satellite here, grind them to dust. You know how this is. Wounded has been doing very, very well with this Kinnan list for quite some time. I talked to him a decent amount about this deck. He's still trying to get me to play Armored Scrapcorcher, and I have not yet. So for those of you still holding out on Armored Scrapcorcher, you're not alone. This is mid-range Kinnan, right? This is in the list that Max has been doing very, very well with. He and I both agree that it's our favorite deck to bring to tournaments, and I think it's my best performing deck of the year by a significant amount. And Max is basically just playing this and this alone at tournaments, and I get it. It is an insanely consistent, powerful list. I know he recently went on to Trinisphere and was very happy with that inclusion, which is a card I still haven't tried, but I'm very interested in testing in the list. Basically, a lot of people think it's a bit of a king-making card, but it turns out it's actually really good at being able to make sure that your opponents cannot have double or triple protection going into their combo turns. For those who don't know Kinnan yet, it is big mana, big flips. You want to flip over giant cards. One of the highest top-end decks of the format, but also can have a floor if you're not comfortable with playing with this deck. So definitely a very powerful deck and a very, very strong contender in the format. Oh, sleeves are coming off. I am done with these sleeves. We have Uki Wolf here with a Niv-Mizzet Parun deck. This is a classic Niv style control deck. Niv's been doing pretty well as of the past few months. There's been ups and downs as far as that deck's popularity in the tournament scene, but wow, this shirt is really comfortable. Sorry, this is a very natural actual. This is so comfy. Anyways, Niv's been doing pretty well as of late. There's been periods of time where Niv is like 3 people show up to a tournament and do really well with it, and then it sort of disappears for a little bit. People start to get the joke, and then it comes back and then does well again. It is the definitive blue-red control deck of the format. I find that in archetypes where your opponents are casting more creatures and stuff like that, Niv tends to struggle a little bit, but also can provide its own game plan. And in those situations can just kind of go for dockside lands where they're playing dockside, bouncing dockside, playing dockside again, cloning it with something, playing Displacer Kitten, and really started getting out of hand with that part of the archetype. So Niv is definitely exceptionally powerful. You got a ton of interaction here. 41 instants in this archetype. So many ways to trigger Niv-Mizzet, not to mention the fact that there are also 5 sorceries. So 46 of the cards in your deck trigger your commander. Apart from that, there's also card engines on top of it. And then, we have Curiosity, Ophidian Eye, and Tandem Lookout as our creature/enchantment combo pieces to be able to go infinite with Niv-Mizzet. Most lists these days are not running additional outlets, but also interesting to see Nezahal in these lists. Uncounterability just like Niv, and it's very, very strong. Curious to see if Niv players will ever go on a Consecrated Sphinx, as that card's been exceptionally powerful for me in the meta as of late. But very, very cool to see Niv continue to do its thing. We have Twang, also known as Jorman. This is one of the best players in the format, in my opinion. Jorman is a really solid cEDH player, and someone who comes from the New York crew with people like Malcolm, our Bryce Strachan, our Sisse player, who is always out there playing Sisse, and who also just missed this tournament. I believe he came in 17th or 18th. So another Sisse palette on top of myself who just barely missed the cut on this tournament. And yeah, there is Twang is just does really well in these tournaments, was able to win Festival of Nights, won Bonfire, and is placed very well in a number of other tournaments. But Jorman's most common deck is Blue Farm, and a deck that Jorman plays a lot of. And, if it's a deck that's going to keep putting up results, makes sense for him to keep playing it. Boromir's another inclusion in his version of this deck. It's definitely a little human heavy in this version, and I'm curious to see if he's on that Coward of Souls deck, which he is. Makes a ton of sense. Got the classic Breach enchantments here. Stern Scolding, not the most common inclusion in Blue Farm. But it's pretty solid. And also Angel's Grace, which is definitely one that I wasn't expecting. Jorman also crushed the Swiss with this deck. I believe he ended with 26 points, meaning that of 7 rounds, he won 5, drew 1, and lost 1. So that was the best record for sure ending the Swiss, and definitely got him a lot of points heading into the Invitational come forward. But Norman's been playing Blue Farm a lot and doing really well with Blue Farm a lot and just missed the top 4 of this tournament. Kinnan, big flip by Victini. This is a big flip Kinnan list. This one definitely running some pieces I'm not too used to in Kinnan. Has Fabricate as well as some other artifact tutors in the list. Force of Vigor, which is commonly used and commonly not used in the archetype for sure. But we have an additional filter. So we have Mirage Mirror, the normal infinite mana filter in the deck. And obviously we have Treasure Vault down here in the lands. But we actually have Prismite in the creature base of this list, which is a creature version of this. There's a Prophetic Prism to be able to channel the infinite mana. The infinite colorless mana specifically from your Kinnan activations, and then Walking Ballista, which is also not the most commonly used. If you basically make infinite colorless mana with Prophet, you can just easily just drop a Walking Ballista, as well as having the infinite colors for your Thrasios as well. So definitely very interesting to see some of these older Kinnan pieces, especially Prophet, which has not been played by a lot of the pilots for quite some time. This one also on Kogla, which is very interesting because I feel like most players have moved on to Thormdeneth, so I'm not sure if the 7 power is really worth giving up multiple fights, but obviously being able to blow up artifacts and enchantments repeatedly is pretty solid. This list reminds me of like Kinnan from just like 2 years ago. I don't know, it's not like saying it's super outdated, but definitely has some tech in it that hasn't been used in quite some time. Aloe Shepherd, also a card that's just not really played much in Kinnan anymore. So definitely some older pieces here for this Kinnan list, and apart from that, it's just very solid. I mean, Kinnan is, once again, one of the strongest decks in the format and a deck that is going to continue doing well because Kinnan is so inherently powerful. It is a very strong archetype and a deck that will continue to perform well over and over again. So congrats to our pilot on this Kinnan deck. We have Noel Bird Tempo by Marster Alex. This is Thrasios, Tymna, mid-range. This is a return to Thrasios and Tymna with some crazy inclusions here. And some really, really interesting tech. Now, I believe from third-party information, I was told that our player in this top 4 has said that Thrasios and Tymna never actually died. It's just been being played wrong. So I guess, having the result to follow up with that claim is pretty sick. We have Oko here in the 99, which I've been seen play in more mid-range decks lately. It's just really good at being able to answer a creature almost forever. I know for a fact that during the Swiss, I was able to pull out Oko and shut down a Sisay that literally could not ever get its Sisay back because none of the players would trade with it. But this list specifically is running some super underplayed cards. I mean, so first of all, it's worth to say, there's Collector Roof in this deck. There is Null Rod in this deck, and there is Stony Silence in this deck. So this is a very artifact hate heavy Tymna Thrasios list. This list is trying to shut down artifacts from your opponents, which is crazy because it's still running Chrome Mox, J-Lo, Lotus Petal, Mana Crypt, Mox Amber, Mox Diamond. So definitely a good amount of artifacts to stop that stuff. And then we have a bunch of free spells in this deck. We have Submerge, we have Misdirection, we have Force of Vigor, Mindbreak Trap, Snuff Out, Deadly Rollick, Force of Will. So a ton, just a metric ton of free interaction. No ad-nauseam here, so you get to play like all of these super high cost free spells. You have Dismember here, which I've been loving in the format lately. It's awesome to be able to be like, okay, my opponents are going for combo, and it's like, oh, I have a white mana or a green mana up. I guess green mana specifically, where people don't associate with removal, and then you're like, boom, kill it with Rollick. Kill it with Dismember. The Mystical Dispute here too, which is also a card that's like popular in 60 card formats, but not really in cEDH, which is pretty sick. And then, step through here to go grab some of your more powerful wizards. Specifically, I believe it's here for grabbing Thoracle pretty easily. And I don't really know, are there any other wizards in the deck? I guess Derevi is another one, which I don't think Derevi has any explicit combos in the deck, but it feels like more of just a value engine. We have 2 pirates in this list, which are pretty underplayed. We have Kiteself Rebooter, which is like a Duress Banishing Light on a stick. So an evasive Tymna attacker that also can just take a card from an opponent's hand until Freebirder leaves. And then you have Crytail Larcenist, the new inclusion, which I think is pretty much being slept on pretty heavily. Just a human pirate that is a Grasp of Fate on a creature body, which is pretty sick. People don't want to remove it because then it frees up those things. Obviously, it allows things to be treasures, unlike Grasp of Fate, but there's a lot of situations where people want to just try and kill a Larcenist and don't want to crack those treasures. And if they crack the treasure, they have to cast whatever it is. It's also a really interesting way to lock down commanders and stuff like that. So pretty cool card as far as that is concerned, and definitely one of the new pickups from Ixalan. We have Brina the Demagogue here, which I've heard a lot of people hyped about over the years and then never actually play. But here we have Brina. From what I understand, it just sort of takes over combat in a lot of these games. It just sort of controls what people can do in combat, and it really starts to leverage a bunch of advantage and does sort of the Edric thing in the way that you are, having benefits for attacking other people, but you really start to just get a lot of advantage from this card being active, and it's pretty sick. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff that you can do with Brina, and it's one of the most underexplored cards in cEDH, in my opinion. This is a crazy, sick mid-range grindy list, and definitely a really good lesson in just, we have not solved cEDH by any means. And I just said this on a recent episode of the Mind Sculptors, but this format is wide open, and still you can do crazy stuff where people thought Tymna and Thrasios was basically dead. And this list playing a bunch of atypical pieces here, making the top 4 of one of the largest tournaments of the year by absolutely grinding it out with some of the crazier pieces I've seen in these mid-range decks. And you know what? Sometimes you need pieces that people don't understand, or pieces that people aren't used to playing with, right? There are pieces in this format that people don't know how to play with their eyes closed. And against these new pieces, against some of these atypical engines, people will make mistakes. It doesn't mean play whatever jank you find across your table, but it means, when a pilot like this makes an intentional choice to play an atypical piece because they think it's going to be effective in the format, it does pay off. So congrats to our top 4 player here. We have Silent E here with Blues Clues. Silent E, a fellow Massachusetts person who I used to play with a good amount in my local scene, here with this Blues Clues deck, which is pretty sick. This is the non-Tymna Kraum Sans Green archetype, right? The idea is that you have Will in the command zone being an infinite mana outlet, as opposed to having your Kraum and Tymna as your card advantage engines, and Will also being very low to the ground, enabling certain free spells and other stuff like that. So you have things like Hullbreaker Horror able to go off with your commander. You can go through Baron Dockside loops. You have Braid's Arisen Nightmare with this crazy art that I've never seen before. I'm not really sure where that one's from, but that one's there to be able to convert those clues into sacrifices for your opponent's permanents and things like that. What's really cool about this version of the archetype is that you get to be really low to the ground, so you don't really have to play a bunch of bad 2-mana rocks. You can play things like Relic of Legends, which is like a medium 3-mana rock, but you also have Cloudstone Curio combos. You don't have to play Arcane Signet and Fellwire Stone and stuff like that because you're super low to the ground, right? You have your Mox Ambers and other things like that, and Springleaf Drum, to be able to keep your artifact package really low and get your commander out as soon as possible. We have Blind Obedience here, which is another one of the ways that you can convert, infinite bounces of your commander and infinite mana into an actual win con. And it's got a lot of different outlets and definitely can explode out of nowhere while also having a lot of the best cards that you would normally see in a deck like Blue Farm, but being able to attack the format in a different way. And definitely if you enjoy like a leaner version of Blue Farm, maybe grinds a little bit less, but has a little bit more explosive potential, you're going to really enjoy this list. It's pretty sick, and it's really cool to see someone who used to be in my local space be doing really well with this list. So congrats. We have our winner here. Tier 2 deck doesn't win tournaments by Doom DG, which is funny because according to their recent Twitter post, this deck name was actually made before this tournament. But we have another Tymna Kraum here list. Obviously, this was a very good tournament for Blue Farm, which has been a deck that's been up and down throughout the past few years. But right now, Tymna Kraum doing very, very well in this tournament. Another Boromir Tymna Kraum list, and another one running Fimage and Phyrexian Manamorph and not Flesh Duplicate, which I'm very interested to hear from some of the pilots below. If you have any thoughts on this, especially think it's about the 2 blue mana cost, but if you have any thoughts, or if you're any of the pilots from this tournament, let me know if that was a choice that y'all made very consciously. We have another version of this 1-wheel Blue Farm. You want the 1 wheel for your Bowmaster payoffs a lot of the time, and then you don't really want it to be too much, or the situations where you're really just sort of screwed out of a hand. But the idea is that this is a, classic Blue Farm list. You are grinding, you are trying to be the best deck at winning second and doing exactly that game plan. We have no One Ring in this variant of the list, and also no Talion. So this list really just using Tymna and Kraum as the advantage engines in this archetype, as opposed to Talion, to be able to grind out some resources and things like that. This list has been doing pretty well lately. It's obviously, considered one of the best decks in the format, and we have DoomDG here taking down the entire tournament, a 200-person, very, very stacked tournament with this archetype. So congrats to DoomDG for the performance in this tournament. What do y'all think about this one? It's been a crazy expo. It was a very, very good tournament, very well run in a crazy space. And once again, a lot of the best players in cEDH here playing, competing for that #1 title. Any interesting decks that y'all thought about? I love seeing Talion make the top 16. It was pretty sick. I love seeing this Bjorna Wernog deck and Thrasios and Tymna in this super atypical way with some really specific deck choices that clearly paid off for our pilot. So a lot of really cool stuff here. What was your favorite deck from this top 16? I'm curious, leave that down in the comments below. And once again, thank you to Into the AM for sponsoring all the fashionable styles you saw me wearing here in this video. I genuinely was putting on some of these items for the first time, and they're so freaking comfy, and I will definitely be wearing them as we move forward because this stuff is really comfortable and really sick. And if you want 10% off your order, once again, click that link that will be in the description or in the comments down below if you want to be able to get 10% off your order and get some of these sick graphic tees or other clothing items that are on that shop. Thank you all for watching this video. Remember to hit like and subscribe while you're here on YouTube. And while you're watching, remember that we offer cEDH coaching here on Comedian MTG. If you're curious about that, you can follow me at Twitter at Comedian MTG. Find me on Discord at comedian_MTG, or you can email me at comedianmtg@gmail.com, all of which are in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch y'all next time.
Lie awake at night? Are you afraid to turn out the lights? Is there